Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Adrienne Gilliard here with Sandra Bazan, and we're from the ELC's Inclusion Team, bringing you Behavior Bites Tidbits. To finish up our topic of red flags for SPD, or sensory processing disorder, today we're going to discuss the strategies that we can use in the classroom and at home to help support our children that have SPD. Now, a slight recap from last week. Sensory processing issues happen when children have trouble handling the information that their senses are taking in. Children with SPD may have trouble being aware of their bodies. They can struggle with their balance and coordination, and different children can be affected by sensory issues in different ways. Some may be very sensitive to sensory stimulation, and others are much less sensitive than their peers. So, Sandy, let's take a few minutes and talk about different sensory systems and what a sensory diet is.
Right. So when we talk about sensory, right, what is that exactly? And so we have to understand that we as people, we are taking in all of this information, all this stimuli from our environments, right? And how do we do it? Well, we take it in through all of our senses. And we all know, the five senses, the sight, the smell, the hearing, the tactile, the taste. But then there's also that proprioceptive, and then there's that vestibular as well. And we'll get into that as we talk. But yeah, there's this there's this need for us to regulate. And so the input that we get from the outside definitely impacts how we behave, right? So that question of is it sensory or is it behavior? The answer is almost always yes, because the way that we behave can be a direct correlation to the way that we're interpreting or processing that external stimuli input within us, right?
Right.
So we talk about the different kinds of senses and what can we do, right? So for example, you have up here strategies for sensory processing disorder, and when in doubt, use heavy work. Well, yeah, when in doubt, use heavy work. Well, what does heavy work mean, right? So it's any type of input, and that's that proprioceptive. So let's dissect this. Proprioceptive is all those big muscle groups. Mm-hmm. Right, that's the jumping and the bouncing and the big gross motor movements, right? And you get this by engaging in activities of pushing and pulling, right? So anything that you feel like that is going to help this child who you feel may have a sensory need or needs some extra input would be anything like pushing a bin of blocks, right? Or helping stack chairs. Good. You have great examples here. This is at school, but we can also do this at home because we see that these children need to self-regulate and we need to teach them how to. So these were already jumped into the strategies, right? So at home, like I said, the chairs, we could do push-ups on the wall push-ups. We have a great visual in a little bit. You'll see what we call a push wall. And that's just a literal area in the room designated to go ahead and push against the wall to get that proprioceptive input in, right? So at home, what can we do, Adrienne? We can help you had a great story of your son who you saw needed, and what did that look like?
Right. He definitely needed to help balance his senses. And so when we were at home, I just, would look at certain things that he would do and just figure out, okay, something is going on here. So the heavy work that I would get him to do would be to organize the pantry. And that is where I kept a lot of our canned goods. And it was pretty much moving the canned goods from one shelf to another one. To make it a little bit more fun, I would tell him to just kind of match up the labels on the can in terms of colors and everything. But my main thing was to get him to pick up those heavy cans and move them from one shelf to another. And it really helped a lot.
Right. So so in the classroom, what we see with a child who might need some extra input for his proprioceptive, senses or system is a student who seeks rough play. You know, those students who are
Yes.
always crashing into each other or furniture, they throw themselves on the floor, kind of a deal. So one of the strategies would be to have a place in the classroom where you can have those gross motor movements, like have them stomp around the classroom, reenacting a part of a book, right? Jumping up and down, deep pressure. A lot of these children really enjoy deep pressure massages, and they almost like, you can see them like melt into it, right? Or working against resistance. So anything with resistance bands, anything like we said before, pulling, pushing, right?
And going on a bear hunt, that have them practice going on a bear hunt where they're walking through the forest. Even if
they're on all fours, right?
Right. Even the ants go marching one by one.
Okay,
Singing
so
that song and allow them to march.
I love that idea, because now we're now targeting what might be considered the vestibular system, which is the other movement sense that we have, right? And it's related to how our balance and how we perceive our body's orientation to be in this particular space, right? So they need constant movement, right? So these are the children that would benefit from one of those wiggle pads. Have you seen them that on like a cushion seat, and then they can wiggle? And so now that movement, the sense of movement now is able to either regulate, like kind of ground them. They need this to feel grounded. Maybe a rocking chair is another great strategy to use for a student who needs that swaying kind of movement, right? A bouncing ball, those I don't know if you've seen them, but like those exercise balls that we can sit on, and they're used now as chairs, even at sometimes, like that bouncing, that ability to just move my body where I am, that's all vestibular, input. Okay. And so those are the movement kind of strategies, right? So then we talk about, what are the other senses? So what about those kids that have like tactile? They need they're extra touchy feely. They're always touching your skin, or they're always touching fabric. Right? So that's something that we need to consider. Auditory input, how does the sound in my room affect my students? How is my tone, my volume and my tone, really, how does that affect students that might be, over responsive or under responsive to sensory experiences, right? So you have a student who might constantly be humming, right? Or you have a student who you consistently ask to lower your voice or use your inside voice, and they continuously, they seem like they're always yelling. That might be because they don't necessarily hear themselves and how loud they are, or they need that extra input for themselves. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Yeah. So those are some different, so what's the other sense? Visual input. So your eyes, lighting, right? What's the lighting look like in your classroom? Is it too bright? If you have an over responsive child, you want to dim the lights. If you have an under responsive child, you want to make the room brighter, right? And we'll get into I think your later slides have something about the different types of responses to stimuli. Right there, that's a good one. That's the push wall. So that push wall is literally a great tool for that proprioceptive need to push against something. When you see that they need that big gross motor movement, that often helps them, kind of calm down a little bit.
And Sandy and I did another tidbit on the push wall separately. So if you want to take your phones out and take a picture of the link, this is the actual link to that tidbit that we've done before.
Right. So when you have a student that's like seeking visual input, right? They might be more interested in moving parts of toys, like the spinning of objects, right? And so you might incorporate flashlights, something, or toys that light up, anything that has any kind of moving parts with lights, that would be a phenomenal activity for students who are seeking extra visual input, right? What about, the sense of smell?
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen those students that they have to sniff everything? They literally sniff everything, the paper that they're writing on, the marker they're about to, the crayon, the Play-Doh. They're continuously like seeking different smells, right? So, things like essential oils, or scented markers, or maybe essential oils at home, right? But I used to have I called them smellies, but they were literally chapstick.
Mm-hmm.
You know the different flavored chapsticks that we have
Yes.
out there, the raspberry, the blue. And I would ask them, if I saw that they were seeking, and especially if I knew that a student had a sensory diet that called for additional olfactory sensory inputs, I'd put a smelly on them and they could sniff it, or I'd ask the mom what's their favorite lotion at home, and I could, it's soothing. Have you ever had that lotion that has like lavender in it, or our sense of smell has a lot impact with our moods and triggering memories as well. So and then the last one would be like oral, and those oral seekers, they put everything in their mouth. They're chewing on the eraser, they're chewing on their clothes, they're just chewing, they're constantly mouthing.
That's how they're exploring, right?
That's exactly how they're exploring. So one of the things that you can do is heavy work for the mouth. Well, what do you mean heavy work for the mouth, right? Chewing. Anything chewing, something crunchy, have them chew, celery sticks or carrot sticks if they're not into, the healthy stuff, crunchy pretzels, anything that you have that crunch. Chewing gum, I know it's not the favorite, but like anything with that chewing motion, something that requires an apple, anything that requires them to really, really chew, is going to mimic that heavy work for the mouth. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah. So that's basically all of the strategies. Really, you just have to really understand where so process, it's SPD again, it's a spectrum disorder, right? And so what might be super tolerable for me may be intolerable for somebody else, right? So then we talk about, well, what kind of response to a stimuli is this student having, and then we can decide what types of strategies or tools or sensory diets we're gonna provide. And I said that word twice now, right? Sensory diet. And what is that really? And a sensory diet really, Adrienne, is when you go to an occupational therapist, because in order to have a sensory diet, you definitely need a professional, right? So if there is a concern of sensory processing, that's exactly when you're going to go seek a referral for an occupational therapist, right? And when they decide, or if they decide that your child needs a sensory diet, well, what is that exactly? And it's what they need in order, whether it's more of or less of an input of some sort, for them to be able to function optimally in their current environment, so that they feel regulated. Right. And so, well, that's hard to do, right? So it's a lot of trial and error, right? But one of the things you need to really focus on at first is, well, identifying, is this student, is my son, is my daughter, because we have a lot of families on this as well. So anybody can really assess, are they being overly responsive, or do they don't see it at all and they're under responsive, right? So what does that mean to be sensory over responsive or responsivity, right? So that just means that they can have an input, a stimuli from the outside, and it's overload for them, right? So these are the students that hear a noise and they cover their ears because auditorily it's too much for them, right? that's over responsive, as opposed to an under responsive auditory would bring their ear up to the microphone or up to a speaker, right? Or stands right in front of the person. So do you see the difference?
Yes.
And so we, as the educators and families and who might notice that there might be a sensory issue, we have to be very careful, because it's not one size fits all. It's not. We really need to pay attention and see, okay, is this student overly responsive to whatever it is? And if that's the case, then what do we have to do? We have to bring it down, right? Because if they're overly responsive, then it's too much for them. So I then manipulate my environment and the activities, and I bring it down. So if they're over responsive to light, to visual stimuli, then guess what? I don't have bright lights, white, bright fluorescent lights in my room. I might have soft lamps or just the sunshine from outside. Like, okay, so if I have a student who's overly responsive to loud sounds, I might have very quiet music. I might lower my voice when I interact, right? I might make it a rule in my classroom that we have to have inside voices, right? And so what happens if he's and so that's the point. The point is to really look at that particular student, that particular person, and see, okay, is the behavior being displayed overly too much, or is it, wow, I mean, this child, no matter how loud I put the volume up, they continuously go and put their ear up to the speaker, right? So we have to really, really pay attention to the nuances, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
So that's what we have. And so then, you have a great slide up. I think everybody should take a picture of this, because it has a really good examples for 3 to 4 year olds, but it gives a good idea of, oh, I understand that he's being overly responsive, right? And so when you have a student who's under responsive to, I don't know, spinning, you'll see them constantly, because they need so much more of the spin in order to feel regulated. So what could we do? We can incorporate one of those tools that I said for like that vestibular motion. There's just, again, it's one of those things where if you have a question, you're not sure, that's the time to go and look for a referral for the specialists, which are the occupational therapists, right? We can always collaborate with the families. We always collaborate with whatever reports the specialists give. That's the meat of it. That's what the sensory diet is. Whatever that child needs, whether it's to give more of or less of, but that has to come from an occupational therapist for it to be, a sensory diet. And sensory processing disorder needs to be diagnosed as well. It's not, oh, he's a sensory, that's a sensory seeking that's sensory seeking behavior maybe, but you can't really, I want to stress that we should not go about labeling everybody and
diagnosing the children in our classes. We are not able to do that.
Right. So I mean, that's sensory processing in a nutshell. And I think some good strategies just to get us started.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So thank you, Sandy, for going into detail with all of that. And just understand that with the right support, your child with sensory processing issues can succeed in the classroom, on the playground, at home. Just make sure that you get the right support. And if you are still experiencing challenging behaviors with any of the children in your classrooms, you can always reach out to Debbie Kay on our warm line, where the number is 954-295-0672. We'd like to encourage you to connect with us on Behavior Bites Zoom that is held every Friday from 1 until 2. Speak to your director about registering for that. And if you found this video and other videos of ours helpful, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you back here next time.
Take care.